Hello, so welcome to Module 4 on economic systems, and I'll be presenting this in two parts. This first part, Part 1, will give you an overview and an introduction to how we look at economic systems in anthropology and how you can describe an economic system in any society. And then Part 2 will be one close ethnographic study, or case study, of one people's, and that is of the Trobriand Islanders' economic system as described by Bronislaw Malinowski. You'll remember that Malinowski was a functionalist anthropologist who really introduced the concept and the practice or method of ethnography, largely through the study of the Trobriand Islanders that we'll be looking at today, or in Part 2. So let's get started. First, as a review, let's look at the connection between modes of subsistence and political systems, and that's going to lead us to a third level of integration, which will be economic systems. So remembering hunter-gatherers, that they had the lowest population density, right? And this is a scale of intensification of labor, or integrational complexity of society, from hunter-gathering up through industrialism, such as we talked about last time. One key point to take away from that lecture, if I didn't make the point clearly there, is the notion of necessity being the mother of invention. And let's replace that with the term adaptation. Necessity being the mother of adaptation. Remember, as from the history material, we're not going to be looking at human societies as in a state of evolution from a lower to a higher level of evolution, not at all. Instead, we're looking at societies as adaptive to their ecological contexts and settings. Only when something of major impact changes in that ecology, in their environment, do a people need to shift to some other way of living, okay? Everything else being equal, people don't want to change the way they're living. They develop these traditions and these practices over time, gradually, from within, and they are well suited or fit with their environment, okay? Only when something like outsiders come in to impose colonialism or something like that, do a people then have to make a rapid change in their way of life. Otherwise, it's very gradual. When you look at the hunter-gatherers, for instance, with the forest people that you're reading about the Bambudi Pygmies, you notice they're very happy within their way of life. Thank you very much. They don't want what we have. In fact, when offered it, they'll decline it. They don't want it. It's not the case that people want something more than they've got or different than what they've got. They are hunter-gatherers. That's what they love. Okay, and remember, they're the original affluent society. They have more free time, more leisure time for leisure activities than any other people on the planet. Why would they want to change? Okay, so when might they change? Well, let's say they get pushed out of the forest, or something happens to the forest around them if they're a forest hunter-gatherers, right? Well, now they might have to do something to make resources go further. They might have to either produce more people. In hunter-gathering, they don't really grow as a population because they use monogamy, right? And they're very far apart from one another, so it keeps the population down. But let's say they felt that they had to start planting some food, because available resources in the forest were diminishing for some reason. And so maybe now they're going to take some of the plants that they used to gather, and they learn how to plant it. That's how horticulture actually began some 10,000 years ago, when people in the Fertile Crescent, in the Middle East, moved in from the coast inland. They brought some vegetation with them and learned how to plant it. That was the beginning of horticulture in human society, okay? But once people do start doing horticulture or pastoralism, which might be better suited to their environment if they have animal herds there, then they start growing and their population does start growing, because remember, from horticulture, they need more people to do the farming, to manage the herds. And so they, if it's patrilineal, which is often the case in early forms of these societies, they're going to develop polygyny, one man, plural wives, plural children, more children, and it grows very quickly. Okay? And even in matrilineal societies, by the way, you still often have polygyny, one man, plural wives. We'll see an example of that later. All right. So anyway, so now their population continues to rise, and as it does with horticulture and pastoralism in their still egalitarian tribes, right? Once they develop surplus, let's make a marker here where that might occur. If you add surplus, because they have to form more surplus if their population is growing, right? They start planting more, they start increasing their herds because their population is growing. And pretty soon they have a surplus of stuff which they can trade with others, which they can use as a tribute to a political central organization, a lineage or a clan, right? And they adapt upwards into a more intensified level of society, from a tribe to a chiefdom, and then eventually from a chiefdom to a state. All right? Again, only when the conditions require that. Okay, makes sense? Let's move on. We've already seen then the integration of modes of subsistence and political systems right here. These go hand in glove. If you tell me that you know of people who are hunter-gatherers, I can tell you that they're organized as a band. I can tell you that they have an uncentralized social life. They don't have any central leadership. They don't have any political leaders. I can tell you that they have an egalitarian ethic. They think of everyone as being equal to everybody else. There might be a better hunter or a better gatherer on any given day or week, but that may be very fluid. There's no official unegalitarian positions at all. By the way, think of that when you read the article on eating Christmas in the Kalahari. Hunter-gatherers are egalitarian, and they don't have stratification, right? Everyone is considered equal to everyone else. So they value cooperation, they value sharing, they value communalism, everyone being equal with everyone else. And when they bring in food from the hunt, if you'll see this in the forest people, right? Who gets the meat? Everybody. Anybody in the camp gets an equal share of the meat. The main hunter doesn't get a better share of the meat. Everybody eats, even the disabled or the elderly, or someone just visiting the camp for the day. That's this basis of egalitarianism. Very informal, very family-like, familiar, right? And the whole history of human adaptation to more intensified, complex social systems, again, not evolution, but adaptation, is the history of moving from very informal, familiar ways of living to very formalized, even to legal systems when you get to the state, right? You don't have any legal systems amongst the Bambuti pygmies. From uncentralized to centralized, from egalitarian to stratified or hierarchical. Once you get surplus, you get some people have more wealth than others. And how does that happen? Because in order to keep their growing society in check, they allow, say, one lineage to be the dominant lineage with a headman, and then they give tribute to that headman eventually. Just in a regular horticultural tribe, they don't give tribute. Everyone is still equal, but the headman just rules by example, leads by example. But once they get that surplus, then that one who would have been, say, the headman of the tribe may become the chief over several lineages, and people give tribute based on surplus to the chief's lineage or clan, and now you have this system of inequality of wealth and power, which just magnifies. Now things continue to grow and populations continue to grow. Now you start getting into, with chiefdoms, you start getting into even warfare, taking captives and this kind of thing, eventually into state-level empires and colonialism, right? All right. But it's all driven by the mode of subsistence, which gives a pattern to the political organization. I think I have some more slides on that. Very quickly, let's go through these. What we mean by band and tribe and chiefdom and state. These are the four kinds of political systems that we're looking at and relating to subsistence and then to economics. All right. The band, again, they hardly ever really come together as one whole, but everyone within a wide distributed area. If they speak the same language and they're hunter-gatherers and they're related to each other through blood and marriage, they make up a band. But they really just live in the camp. We looked at that. The tribe, we talked about all of these last time, so I'm just going to go quickly through these. The picture you see is going to be from the film you're going to see called The Feast, about the Yanomamo of Venezuela and Brazil. Notice they are a horticultural tribe because they do, even though they do some hunting, they also plant some tubers. Okay, manioc they plant, I believe it is. Now they stay more in one place, although they move around. They're expansionary, if you remember that from last time, as they have this long fallow agriculture around their villages. And the village now houses not just one basic extended family of people, but now the extended family is more like an organized lineage with several generations, 2 or 3 generations, and there are several of these lineages intermarried. So you may have 5 or 6 lineages in this village, and one of the lineages will be the dominant lineage, and the headman of the whole village will come from that dominant lineage. The tribe rarely comes together, but they can for fighting. They could come together for hunting or ceremonies. Then you see the tribe, like in the Indian Wars in the United States, when they needed to fight a larger group, such as white people coming in and invading their territories. They could unite their various villages into more of a tribe level, or even unite the tribes into an alliance. Okay, that's the basis of the tribe. The chiefdom, now you've seen that once you have surplus, now what would have been a lineage now becomes a clan going back further generations, because now wealth and power are concentrated in the chiefly clan, okay, which goes back many generations. And with that centralization, you get the specialization. Some people are just political leaders, like the chief and his people. You might have an army and a navy that the chief commands. You might still have some people farming and some people doing other things. So specialization, centralization, stratification, or hierarchy all develop with the chiefdom. And then it just intensifies from there. This is just a picture from the Kwakiutl in northwest coast of the United States on the left, and you see the totem pole represents their centralized, stratified chiefdom. Although it's also representing, some of you may know, spirit entities that spirit guides that are associated with a particular chief. Then on the right, you have a Trobriand Islander village along the coast. And by the way, honestly, many chiefdoms first develop around coastlines because there's easier trade with canoes or other forms of boats, and you tend to get, and they're very abundant economically because marine life is abundant. So you tend to have these chiefdoms based on surplus growing up around coasts, not always, but very commonly. And the one we'll look at today on part 2, the Trobriand Islanders, are an islander, inter-island peoples. And then the state. You can just look at the state and see how it's organized. Now you've got millions of people. I talked about this last time. The very monumental architecture. Now it's fully stratified and fully centralized. One of the paradoxes, I think, of anthropology is looking at how the more people that you have to organize, the fewer people are at the top. So you have, at least as a figurehead, sometimes more than that, if it's like a king or a despot, you have one person at the top of this huge megalopolis, not just one city or, state even, but an empire, a global empire, okay, which is interesting. All right, now remember, you have these slides at the bottom of the module as well, so you could slow them down and look at them for yourself and use them as a study guide while we go through this. All right, so we've looked at economic subsistence systems. We've looked at how that pairs with and helps to develop different political systems. And now we're going to add in economic systems. Now, all human societies have got to accomplish a couple of major things in order to supply themselves with their necessary resources, right? We can give a definition, an anthropological definition of economics, okay, as how societies allocate or distribute, how societies allocate resources, which are the means to achieve their wants and ends. How societies allocate resources to achieve their wants and ends, their needs, basically. And every human society, from the very beginning, and from the simplest to the most complex, have got to have a way of doing two things. They have to organize production, and they have to organize exchange. Production, you see here, is just converting raw materials into usable forms, such as food items or tools. Okay, that's production. And exchange is something central, core to all economic systems. It involves the distribution, allocation, and distribution of goods and services between members of a society or even between social groups. So it's obtaining, that's really, allocation is partly also obtaining and then distributing amongst people those resources. Is it a society where everybody gets an equal share, say, of the hunt, the egalitarian hunter-gatherers economic system? Or is it that the chief gets more wealth concentrated through surplus? So these things, this varies a lot, and now we'll see how. Now, the bottom of this slide, you'll see the name Marshall Solins, the author of a book called Stone Age Economics. And Marshall Solins was an anthropologist who ushered a new approach to economics in anthropology in 1989. 89 was actually even before him. Around the same time, in the 1990s. But he was responding to a book in 1989 called Economic Man by Harold Schneider. Economic Man, the Anthropology of Economics. Now, Harold Schneider would call himself a formalist, and he introduced this notion that all around the world, everybody operates according to a profit motive. So he put the Adam Smith capitalist ideology or theory of economics and said, well, this must apply somehow globally. Everyone everywhere must have a profit motive. But Marshall Solins challenged that notion and brought in a different approach to economic anthropology, not formalist, but substantivist, and that's the approach we're using, his approach, substantivist. Because Solins said, now wait a minute, if you look at the hunter-gatherers like the Bambudi Pygmies and the forest people, where's the profit motive when it comes to everybody sharing their meat equally? And when it comes to everyone, not any one person wanting to stand out like a sore thumb. Everyone needs to cooperate because I might get meat this week, but not for another month, and you might get meat next week. If I don't share it with you and you don't share it with me, then, we're not going to survive. So the profit motive goes out the window, and a more cooperative approach comes in to sharing and exchanging goods and services. An altruistic approach comes in to hunter-gatherers. So he did this study of lots of peoples around the world, and he wrote this great book called Stone Age Economics. I highly recommend it. If you have any interest in economics or business or anthropology, okay? And his framework is what I'm going to introduce for you in this lecture now. So he says there are three, based on observation, based on ethnographic observation of different peoples around the world, there are three major economic mechanisms, and those are what he called reciprocity, redistribution, and market exchange. Now, not everybody in the world whether they're band, tribe, chiefdom, or state, etc., have some form of reciprocity in their economic system, but not necessarily the same kind. There are degrees of reciprocity. We'll look at that. Now, not everybody in the world practices redistribution or market exchange. Not all people have cash, and not all people funnel surplus through a centralized society and give it back to benefit everybody like our taxes do, a redistribution system. Only societies that are centralized do that. So he says, first let's look at reciprocity. And the basic definition is right here, just a mutual giving and taking, giving and receiving between people. But notice, more or less, for the general definition of reciprocity, more or less bound by certain reciprocal ties and obligations. And that's the kicker here, more or less. Hunter-gatherers, predominantly, like in the forest people, and here's the Kung Bushmen that you read about in Eating Christmas in the Kalahari, practice primarily as their dominant mechanism of exchange and mode of reciprocity, generalized reciprocity. Here you see a woman who maybe has brought, looks like an ostrich egg or something of that nature. She's going to share it with everybody equally. Generalized reciprocity is this informal gift giving for which there are no accounts kept and there's absolutely no necessary or immediate return expected. That's generalized reciprocity. I give to give. I give because you're my family and I love you. It's altruistic giving, generalized reciprocity. You don't owe me anything. Here, have this. Now, in hunter-gathering society, that's important, like I just mentioned, for survival and because you need that cooperation amongst the very small group. But notice the left picture, I've also put in a picture of a family, looks like white Americans in a household in the United States, or it could be any Western, family, I suppose. But anyway, the point is, here's Christmas. And notice that at Christmas, around the Christmas tree, and typical middle-class American family, which this looks like it is, okay, the parents are going to be giving based on their income. They don't expect the kids to be giving them much anything in return. Let's say you've just turned 18, you're ready to go to college, or you're 17 or something, and Christmas comes and your parents send you out to the driveway to see your gift, and it's a new car. Oh my God. And you come back in and you say, oh my God, I only gave you a tie. I only gave you this, a cup, Mom, for best mom or whatever. And they're going to say, now that's the best tie I've ever seen. I'm going to wear it today. That's the best cup anyone has ever given me. So the value doesn't matter. In fact, they might just say, I couldn't afford to give you anything this year. That doesn't matter. We love you. You're our kid. Have the car. And be safe. All right. That brings up another point here that will come up in a later slide, but it's called spheres of exchange. Let me see if I can quickly write that here. I'm not doing very well with this. Let me try this instead. I don't like it at all. Okay, let me do this. I'm going to get rid of that if I can here. All right. Spheres of exchange. It'll come up on a slide later. I'll try to write that better later. Spheres of exchange means, S-P-H-E-R-E-S, spheres, that there are situations, different situations in a society, there may be, that may call for different mechanisms of exchange or modes of reciprocity. For the hunter-gatherers, their dominant mode is generalized reciprocity. That's mostly what you need to know about them for their economic system, at least within their people, within their groups. For us, say Americans here, Christmas or a holiday is a sphere of exchange that calls upon generalized reciprocity. Notice that, or think about how, let's say instead it was Christmas and there was an office Christmas party and everyone was sort of expected to bring a gift, right? Now you're going to start thinking, what level of gift should I bring? Are we expected to bring? And everyone's going to try to bring the same kind of level. They're not going to bring a car, So that is another kind of reciprocity, by the way, called balanced reciprocity. Now I'm going to try to give something for which I'm going to get a roughly equal return. I don't want to give too much or too little for that Christmas party. And that's a different sphere of exchange then, a different situation, the office Christmas party. Different from the family Christmas tree. So now let's look generally at this next level of reciprocity, a little more formalized than generalized reciprocity. Balanced reciprocity. You find it in tribes as the dominant mode. You find it amongst horticulturists and pastoralists, especially before they have surplus. Okay? And sometimes also after surplus, but that's not their dominant mode after that. So, balanced reciprocity, gift giving that clearly carries an obligation, underline obligation, I think I can do that here. Clearly carries the obligation, the social obligation of an eventual, roughly equal return. I give you products from the hunt, you give me corn. We're hunters, the hunters like Apache hunters, who right? You are farmers like the Hopi farmers who grow corn and peaches, and they come together at a ceremony at some point, after the harvest. And the Apaches or the Navajos that they're related to might settle at the base of the Hopi mesas, and they come in for the ceremony. They bring products that they've gotten from the hunt or from other means, and Hopis give them peaches and corn of a roughly equal amount. That's a direct or immediate balanced reciprocity. Now notice that probably if they didn't, then maybe the more Navajo, not Apache, for those of you who know what I'm talking about, the Navajo might have burned the fields of the Hopi after the harvest, right? But instead, one way to distribute scarce resources and different resources throughout a region for people who are doing different things in that region, is to trade instead of raid. Okay. So there's immediate balanced reciprocity, and this is usually then between groups of people, right, who they're not current enemies, but they might be trying to form a friendship, and trade is one way they establish and form an alliance, if not a friendship, between peoples. But it can also be what's called delayed balanced reciprocity, which means, okay, we've just had corn, so come on up, we're going to give you all the corn you want, you don't have to bring anything. But we know that you've got a big winter hunt coming up, let's say, and that at the end of the winter hunt you're going to have a lot of meat and hides, so maybe then you can give that to us then. So there's an expectation of this eventual return, okay, that balances out the giving and the receiving of equally valued goods, all right, amongst peoples. And then there's negative reciprocity. And this is a different level of obligation. In fact, here now, and this I'm showing you this is where the profit motive comes in. This is where Walmart, let's say this is Walmart we're looking at, comes in. This is when you exchange cash, in this case, between strangers or enemies, where each side tries to get the better end of the bargain. This is the profit motive, negative reciprocity. It's called negative not because there are bad feelings involved. It's not because it's nasty or fierce between them. It's just that one side is trying to get more than the other. So Walmart is trying, even though it puts things on sale, is still making a profit, or it couldn't subsist, couldn't continue, right? And you, as the shopper, you're trying to get the better value for your money, right? So it's the profit motive. Now, let's say if there was stealing, and someone steals a car, well, that's negative reciprocity. The person that he stole it from doesn't get anything, right? So that's almost like taking something from an enemy. Okay, let's move on. So those are the three levels of reciprocity: generalized, balanced, and negative. And they occur in different kinds of societies, right? In terms of different subsistence modes. Hunter-gatherers, generalized reciprocity. Tribes, balanced reciprocity. Chiefdoms and states, especially states, negative reciprocity at some point. Now, only when you get that centralization based on surplus, so you get so much surplus that you have more than you need. Now, some of that surplus is going to go to the chief's lineage, which becomes then over time the chief's clan over several generations. And that chiefly clan is wealthier than everybody else because all the other clans and lineages within those clans are giving tributes of gifts to that chiefly clan, to the chief, and let's say it's a matrilineal chiefdom to his sisters and mothers, or if it's a patrilineal chiefdom to him and all his brothers and fathers, right? They're giving extra goods and services to the chief because the chief then is responsible, and this is important to know about a chiefdom, all right, versus a state. The chief doesn't acquire or accumulate that wealth for the sake of himself, right? But either on behalf of his sisters and mother or of his patrilineal relatives, he accumulates that wealth in order to give it away. Very different than our system. Okay. For example, the Kwakiutl potlatch in the northwest coast, the matrilineal chief is given all this tribute through the year from all the different clans of the village that he supports and protects. And throughout the year he holds several what he calls potlatches, what we call potlatches. Still today. They went underground for a while, but still we have potlatches today. And this is a huge giveaway ceremony. Traditionally that the chief would put on, and his people, like the matrilineal chief, so the matriline, the women of the matriline would help put this on. And they would take all these extra goods that they had acquired through surplus and give them out. Provide for people. Make sure everyone's got enough to get by. And if they want something, they can have it. Okay. So here's redistribution. The use of obligatory payments of some kind could be tribute, gifts, or could be actual payments like taxes to benefit the whole citizenry. Everybody in that chiefdom or state, in the form of either communal festivals like the potlatch, or public services like building roads and churches. Well, not churches usually, but roads and schools and things like this with our taxes. And these payments or tributes or taxes, right, are funneled like a funnel through a central authority figure or agency, the chief's clan or the IRS in a state. Okay? All of us make these obligatory payments based on our income, right, proportion of the income, which go to the common good by funneling through the IRS in our state and then back out to help maintain schools and roads and bridges and things like this. So that redistribution is very important for a large society to distribute the surplus so that everybody benefits. Okay, got it? Those are the main approaches. And then there's one more mode or mechanism of exchange that, again, not all societies have. Only centralized and stratified, in fact, really industrialized societies is where this predominates. It begins in very large chiefdoms, perhaps, but as a society grows into a state, now market exchange comes in, and now you basically have cash. Or it could be barter. You could have a barter market that's more of a balanced approach. But once you get cash entering into the system, right, which is a fluid, you could apply to anything, and with fixed costs. And so it's a fluid medium of exchange with fixed costs, like how much is the euro worth versus the dollar right now, etc., right? And things are then, you pay for things according to the prices that have been put on them by the sellers. So here, these are strictly commercial transactions. And notice they do not establish any further social obligations between parties. So whereas balanced reciprocity established the social obligation of an immediate or delayed return, Market exchange, right, usually with negative reciprocity, the profit motive, does not establish any further social obligations. I'm always reminded of when I was a graduate student in Arizona at ASU, and I was married, and my husband lent me $2,000 to buy a car so I can get to school instead of bicycling. And so I went to the used car lot, and the guy asked me how much did I have to spend, and I stupidly said $2,000. He showed me this really fancy-looking little, Fiat rack and pinion sedan, with like leather seats and rack and pinion steering. Oh wow, that just looked wonderful to me. And guess what? It was exactly $1,999.99. Right? He was going to get every cent that I brought. He took me like halfway around the block, that's all. Well, I was so sold on this thing. It was such a cute little thing. I paid for it. Signed on the dotted line. I did not get home that night before it broke down for the first time. And it was very near 4th of July. And that 4th of July weekend, my husband Franco at the time and myself went up South Mountain in Phoenix to see the fireworks. And guess what? The brakes stopped working. I didn't have any brakes to come down the mountain. I had to call the police and get a police escort with my parking brake on. Well, the next day I sold that car. I think I sold it for $150. I paid $2,000, and I continued to pay my husband $2,000 until I had it paid off. But I did not believe that I could go back to the car salesman. I had signed on the dotted line. He had no further social obligation to me. That was on me. You see what I mean? That's market exchange, isn't it? And negative reciprocity. I thought I was getting a great deal. He thought he was getting a great deal, the salesman, and he was. Okay, so again, back to this idea here of spheres of exchange. That there are, within our own society, like I've just looked at several of them here, Christmas, the office party, Walmart, car salesman, taxes, those are different spheres of exchange, you see, in American society. There were 5 different spheres of exchange, and they each gave rise to or brought into action different mechanisms and modes, mechanisms of exchange and modes of reciprocity. So these are different sorts of situations, interactional situations that call for the use of different modes or mechanisms of exchange and allocation of goods and services, spheres of exchange. So these two concepts, spheres of exchange and mechanisms of exchange and modes of reciprocity, put those together like I'm doing here, and you get a mapping that would allow you to describe what goes on, the economic functions in any society, from traditional to the most industrialized society. So here, looking at an American, economic system in those terms, I've just created this grid. You can use this grid for any of the systems we look at, and I'll come back to this for several cases that we'll look at. All right, if you take the X's out, you've got the general grid, and then fill in along the left these different situations, spheres of exchange down here. Christmas calls for generalized reciprocity. The office Christmas party calls for balanced reciprocity. Taxation calls for redistribution through that centralized IRS system. Shopping at Walmart or buying a car, right, involves negative reciprocity, the profit motive, and market exchange. Those two go hand in glove. Social Security, what is that? Think about it. We pay into Social Security as we work through our career, and then when we retire, we get a portion of that back every month. So that's a form of redistribution, because everybody pays into Social Security while they're working, and it goes back to benefit everyone who needs Social Security, mainly seniors or disabled people, later on in life. Okay, so that's a redistribution system, and some of the benefits from that. Now, think about the hunter-gatherers and the forest people, the Bambudi Pygmies. Let's see what their economic chart looks like if we could map it on this grid. Very easy. For hunting, I could also add gathering. I don't dare try to write right now. But hunting or gathering, right? Everybody eats. equally. Everybody, shares equally from the hunt. Everybody in the hut gets all the food that the women have gathered and children have gathered during the day, or men have gathered some too. Okay? So generalized reciprocity is the dominant, primary, core mechanism of exchange, mode of reciprocity for hunter-gathering societies. Generalized reciprocity defines the basic structure of a hunter-gathering economic system. Now, to the extent that they also engage with outsiders, think about the forest people if you've read this far, sometimes one of the pygmies may have had a conversation in the nearby town with somebody and they've made an agreement. So the pygmy may take some meat and put it at a certain designated spot they've agreed upon, right outside the forest boundaries, because the townspeople don't like to go. They're afraid of the forest. So they put some meat outside there, and then the townsperson comes by and picks up that meat and replaces it with something they've agreed on, like maybe spoons or something, some kind of utensils that would be useful to the hunter-gatherer. Okay, so that is balanced reciprocity. In fact, it's a delayed form, right? I put this meat out here, tomorrow you come by, you get it, and you leave the utensils. That's a delayed balanced reciprocity. So with the townspeople, they do balanced reciprocity. So I put the parentheses just to show this is outside the group. Okay, they have balanced. And now there are these Bantu banana plantation owners near the Bambuti pygmies, and if you have read this, you'll remember they don't like these guys because these plantation owners try to really treat the pygmies like slaves. They try to get them to work on their plantations without any money, and of course the pygmies resist that. They don't want anything to do with it. So they don't care about they don't think at all about coming in at night and stealing bananas from the plantations, because these guys are their enemies. So there's a form of negative reciprocity, isn't it? They're taking without giving anything in return. Stealing. So you're going to see a film, and the film is called The Feast, about the Yanomamo Indians of northern Brazil and Venezuela. It's a 30-minute film. And the question I'm going to ask you for the film report is going to be more specific than most film reports, so it's even set up like a quiz, but it's still just a 10-point film report. But answer this one carefully, not just in general terms. I'm going to ask you, what are the various mechanisms of exchange and or modes of reciprocity that you observe going on in the film, and why? And so if you want to use this general chart, you can use it to map out what you see and then write about it. Now, I'm not going to give you the answer to that yet. I want you to go watch the film. Now then, here's a general picture that we can look at to kind of close this general understanding. Here's where you see subsistence modes on the left here, right? And economic systems and how they are interconnected. Hunter-gatherers. And you'll see this is an additive model. Do you see how this model kind of goes up like this? We could call that an implicational or an additive sort of model. What I mean by that is hunter-gatherers primarily they hunt and they gather. Within their group, they practice generalized reciprocity, cooperation, sharing, making sure we're all taken care of. Outside of the group, maybe they do some little bit of trade, but not much. Horticulturists and pastoralists got the same level of intensification of labor and integration of society, same level of complexity of society before surplus. Do some hunting. You'll see that you'll be tempted to say that the Yanomamo are hunter-gatherers, but they're not. They also plant, I think, manioc, or a root tuber, and they have a soup that you see in the beginning of the film. And this is things not that they've gathered, but that they've grown. They're horticulturists as well, but they do some hunting. Hunter and pastoralists also do some horticulture. They grow some grain to feed their cows, or they grow some grain to feed their animals. So these people, they do some hunting, but they also do what's underneath them in terms of the level of society integration complexity. All right. Intensive agriculturists, like Southeast Asian rice farmers, let's say, right? Oh, sometimes they do hunter-gathering, but they don't live on the basis of that. And they do some family farming, just for some of the things they don't grow in their rice fields. And, they have some animals that they have, some goats or something, but they don't, that's not the primary basis of their way of life, right? So they do all these things, and they all have generalized reciprocity within the family, right? All these levels have generalized reciprocity within the family. But in addition, because they have surplus, right, these intensive agriculturists also have markets, and they have a concentration of wealth and a stratification of clans and classes of people, right, and what becomes a state-level society. And then that just, of course, when you get up to us, the industrialists, right, industrialized states, post-colonial states, we've got all of it. That is, by the way, think about what I'm saying, simple to complex. Is our economic system more or less complex than hunter-gatherers? Ours is more complex because we have more modes. We have more mechanisms of exchange and reciprocity in different spheres of exchange. You see the model? Isn't that nice? Okay. Now we can put all three of these things we've talked about so far into one picture as well. Modes of subsistence, economic modes, political systems. And this should be kind of make sense. I like this chart. I take some credit for creating this chart, right? And easily seeing how all these things come together and how they all represent a gradual adaptive shift to more and more intensified, less and less informal, more and more formalized systems of human society. Bring these three together and you've got the basic structure of human societies in the world. We've left out peasants, which is, more of a hybrid kind of situation between, within a state, people within a state doing trade and some local farming, but also trading in towns and cities. Okay, but other than that, this is a good overview of the history of humanity. And it also represents the development from very peaceful peoples like hunter-gatherers that don't even really understand the concept of murder or death, at least not until other people have come in and brought it to them, right? Through feuding in the horticultural tribe, the feuds that might go on, life for a life kind of feuds, to pitched battles and warfare, and then empire and colonialism, and right. So all of it starting with modes of subsistence and organizing labor and practices around the mode of subsistence. Do you need more people? Maybe you'll go to polygyny. More wives, more children. You have more people to tend to your crops or your herds. And all these are driven by these then factors of necessity. As the population grows, you need to feed more mouths. Things start to get more and more centralized, more and more, complex and organized and formalized over time. Okay? So here's going to be the question that you're going to look at. You might want to even go look at this film and do the film report before you look at part 2 of this lecture, and where I'm going to give you one very close example. And at the end of that one, I'll probably talk about the Yanomamo again. But I want you to answer this question then. Describe the system of exchange you observe in this film. What forms of reciprocity, notice the S in parentheses, 4 more forms of reciprocity, are evident in the feast that you see in the film, and why is this kind of exchange so important for these people? Okay? So that's the end of part 1 on economic systems. And I'll see you again in part 2.